Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. Just as we get people moving through the webinar waiting area, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping on today's session. My name's Jane Elg. I'm part of the Fernville team here in Melbourne, and I'll be facilitating today's session. And if you've just joined us, I'm looking to get everyone to add their full name to their attendee list, just so that we can see who's joined us today. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have videos on. We've just got quite a large group joining today, which is fabulous. Obviously, the topic is of interest. So we will try and make it as interactive as we can with such a large audience. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat there, and I will endeavour to interrupt our panellists as we go and ask those questions. If we don't get through everything today, then we will follow up and answer any of those questions.
Lucky you're well practiced at interrupting us and wrangling.
So before I kind of kick off on what the session today will be about, I just wanted to introduce our hosts or panelists today, Paul Perrott and Tara Salmon. As many of you will know, Tara and Paul work here at Firmable. So Paul is our co-founder and co-CEO, and Tara is our Chief Revenue Officer here. And together they bring decades of experience in scaling both startups and large enterprise GTM motions. We've seen a lot of sales and marketing evolve dramatically in the last 12 months, and even looking at this presentation today, the last 3 months, we've seen some changes and some really exciting things coming through, which we're going to dive into today. So we're really looking at imparting on you as a viewer today some of the results and some of the activity that we've been doing that's driving our results, as well as what's no longer working for us and why. We'll be looking at key shifts across the market and with our customers, and really giving you some practical steps that you can take away from this webinar and look at embedding in your own business. So let's kind of get started. It's 2 minutes past 12. Hopefully people have got their lunch and they can sit back and enjoy this session. I'll throw to you, Paul, and ask you a question about, is there been a more interesting time to be in sales and marketing than right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly changed. I've been selling for and involved in sales teams and selling internationally for a long time. This is definitely the time that I think where I've seen the most change in both go-to-market sales and marketing. So that's super fascinating. It's challenging as well, of course. I think the world is changing really quickly, and there's both challenges and opportunities in that. But it's I think there's certainly never been a better time to be running a sales tech business. That's for sure.
Awesome. Well, I will kind of leave it to you to maybe jump into the presentation, Paul, and kick us off. And just as mentioned, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we'll answer them as we go.
Cool. Thanks for that, Jane. And maybe, Paul, just before we get stuck into the tips and you'll take us through the first few, thought it might just be helpful just to kind of, level set about like what are the primary jobs that we need to do here in sales and marketing, and it will just kind of help set the scene a little bit for some of the tips that we're doing and why we're kind of emphasizing in certain areas. So, if you just kind of strip it back to basic jobs to be done, it starts pretty simply at like, who are the companies that we need to target? Who's your ICP? Who's your ideal customer profile? Then it's, okay, you've got the companies that you need to target. Who are the right people to talk to there? And, is your user buyer same as your economic buyer, and who's going to make the decisions, and who do you need to kind of map out who you need to get across and connect with at those organizations? Of course, then you need to connect and think about how you're going to do that. So we really think like a multi-channel approach tends to work best there. Sure, email outreach still has a role to play, and air cover with ads and general marketing is great, but a lot of the cut through you're going to get is really just picking up the phone and kind of old school connecting one-to-one. So thinking about, okay, well, what's the best channels and how am I going to get that data to really connect with people? That's all great. You've got that information, but to connect and in a really powerful way, you really need to think about how can I be relevant to this organization, this person specifically, what message is going to resonate with them, you know, what are their pain points, and how you can really get cut through in those conversations. And then finally, okay, you know your prospect, you know the right things to say to them. When's it actually a good time to reach out? So we're finding more and more that this timeliness component is really, really key. So, you know, in our world, for example, at Fernville, we know that if somebody, you know, has a sales team and they're hiring for a new sales role, that's a great trigger for us to kind of reach out and connect and make sure that they're getting their new team member set up for success and off to a good start. So, yeah, I guess if you kind of strip it back to a lot of the basics, this is kind of how we think about things. Yeah, that kind of leads us into, I guess, some of our tips for today. So I'll hand over to you, Paul, to talk through, I guess, a little bit more about what we mean by ideal customer profile.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tara. And just to, I guess, emphasise what Jane said at the top, please feel free to drop your questions in, particularly on the way through. We are very, very happy to respond to questions, and Jane can throw them in. That'll probably make it more interesting for you and more interesting for us. So everyone's a winner with the questions, I think. So, all right. So let's start with ICP, and I think this is the foundational block for kind of great go-to-market. And you can see, I'm sure you're all aware of the definition of ICP. I think the one really key thing about thinking through your ICP, it is it's a real balance between the customers that are easiest to acquire and those that are most valuable. And I think there's often a trade-off between those two kind of concepts. And that's one thing or one bit about ICP that I really encourage everyone to think a little bit about, is how you kind of balance the trade-offs around that. Obviously, having a great ICP or having a really good understanding of your ICP means that you will close faster, you'll have lower cost of acquisition, and ultimately you will hopefully be closing and targeting kind of customers that are most valuable to you. And that's both in size, so what's the size of the deal, and also long-term value. So you can see there's a few factors that kind of go into how to think through your ICP. So where to start? I think that there's kind of four things that I guess we really think are important here. So the first step is data collection and analysis, and this is both kind of analytical in a sense of thinking about lists, looking at data, but also just being curious, listening to customer conversations, talking to your reps, building hypothesis around, okay, what does an ICP look like for us? What are the characteristics? What are the dimensions, if you like, that we should use to describe that? So that there's a number of different dimensions you can use, and you can see some of them on the right-hand side. Is our ICP someone who has a certain type of CRM or a certain type of ERP? Is our ICP someone that must have a minimum of 100 employees? Or is our ICP someone that must have a HR department? Or is in fact our ICP someone that doesn't have an HR department? Is our ICP someone that is B2B or someone that is B2C? Or so there's a whole different set of dimensions that you can use, and we obviously have a pretty biased, we have a bit of a biased perspective on this, but what we really encourage you to do is to think through the filters and the dimensions that you can use in a tool like Fernville to help kind of map your ICP. So you've then mapped it, you've defined these criteria, you've articulated your hypothesis. I think the next step, and we find this, and it's probably one of the big learnings for us actually, is how you then take that and actually take your ICP, which can be quite broad, and then almost create kind of little subsegments. So to give you an example of what I mean, so for us here at Fernville, our ICP, and we're a very horizontal kind of go-to-market model. Our ICP is anyone that's got a sales org that's doing kind of outbound, that is B2B focused, that has probably got at least kind of 3 people in their sales team. So that's kind of our ICP. But what we find is really helpful is then to break that down into different kind of subsegments, which allows us to, I guess, do specific messaging into those subsegments, to prioritize them, just to kind of manage it, and also to, I guess, iterate and test. So you can look at a different subsegment within your ICP, and for our case, that might be tech companies versus professional services companies versus sales and market agencies, and go, okay, well, what's the data telling us about our different subsegments? What do the close rates look like? What are the opportunity sizes? Are there different messages? What's resonating? How do we upskill our SDRs to be having effective conversations with those different subsegments? So that's probably been one of the biggest lessons for us. And I think it's particularly relevant if you've got a horizontal go-to-market, but equally, I think if you've got a vertical go-to-market, it can be really relevant as well. And then I guess the final stage is go-to-market alignment, which is again where I think this concept of sub-segments is really quite helpful. And ultimately, what an ICP is designed to do is to align your whole go-to-market motion around how do I target the customers that are most valuable to us. So that's that's the why for an ICP. So then really embedding the language, common language with your sales team, your marketing team, making sure that you're tagging those customers in your CRM. There's a whole set of things you can do to make sure, this kind of focus and language around your ICP gets kind of just completely kind of embedded in the DNA of your organization. All right, so we've now got a bit of an ICP. Well, we kind of understand our ICP. Well, I guess the second tip, and probably to make this a little bit more tangible, is using this concept of your ICP and the segments to kind of really map your market. So ultimately, what you should know is you should know every single company in your chosen market that is in your ICP. So that's, there is absolutely no excuse for not knowing that. And that both gives you a really good sense of your TAM/SAM, but also, and more importantly, I think it gives you a way of prioritizing how you target these different segments and then how you think about the messaging. So to give you a tangible example, we recently we're about to launch our New Zealand New Zealand offering. So we're about to publish our New Zealand data set, and we're just starting to think through, okay, what is our go-to-market going to look like for that, for the New Zealand market? So what we did was we looked at all the different verticals, and we identified a couple of priority verticals based on verticals that we know are attractive for us. High B2B focus. There's lots of companies. They're big enough. They're likely to they've got good sales organizations, et cetera. So we identified a set of verticals. We looked at the number of companies in those, and then and you can see on that that kind of table on the right. We then went, okay, what are the subsegments that we're going to initially target? So you can see, what we did, again, going back to our ICP, is anyone that's got, 3+ people in a sales organization. We created different verticals. So you can see we had a tech vertical, we had a kind of business services, we had a recruitment, and we had a kind of sales and marketing agency. So we then have a really kind of clear view of the set of companies that we want to target. The other thing you'll notice there is we've kind of prioritized them. So the way we think about subsegments, it's a combination of priority or size, if you like. So the larger, you can see, so take New Zealand Tech. So P1 for us is organizations that have more than 11 people in their sales org. So that's kind of how we think about it. And for us, that's just a really helpful way then of driving go-to-market alignment. So to give you an example, we then have a weekly meeting where we feed a set of prospects or companies into our SDR team. And we'll do that thematically. So we'll say, okay, this week we're going to have a bit of a blitz on recruitment. Here's some thinking around how to talk to recruitment. Here's some common pain points. And that just really helps us kind of drive go-to-market alignment. So yeah, so really encourage you to, I guess, use data to drive sub-segmentation, and then iterate, and that gives you a really good framework, I think, to be effective in how you go to market.
What do we call our P1 prospects internally, Paul?
we are Whenever we actually have another category, which is the P0 category, which we call the Wagyu category. So that's the finest cut, if you like, is the P0s. And it's just a good example of how actually language becomes really important. So we all know what that means, right? So someone will go, oh, this one's Wagyu, and that means that, wow, this is one that's an absolutely great prospect for us. So yeah, good to have a bit of fun with it as well. All right, so tip 3, and again, this is, in a sense, this is self-evident, but one thing I, kind of notice, and we notice, is that companies that have a really clear articulation of their go-to-market motion and how it applies to different objectives, I think are often more successful and often more focused. So simplistically, the way to think about this is different businesses have different kind of sales motions, sales channels. So everywhere from self-service through to, sales assisted, then you go to transactional, and then you get mid-market, and then you get enterprise. And, the motions you use will vary on your deal size, obviously, how mature your market is there any awareness of what you're selling, and if there's not, you're probably going to have to be going outbound, your personas, what's your cost of acquisition? Can you afford to outbound? Can you not afford to outbound? The nature of the offering. Are you an offering which is kind of a land and expand? Kind of PLG, then an upsell motion. So I think really having clarity on what your motion is and what success looks like for you is really critically important. And then how it plays out into the different, I guess, kind of jobs to be done, because you've got these different motions, and then you've actually got different elements of your kind of customer journey, if you like. So you've got new customer acquisition, expansion, upsell, and renewals. And the way you do renewals might be completely different to the way you do new sales. So I think being able to really clearly articulate for your organization kind of what that looks like is really important. So you can see a couple of examples. So there's a couple of organizations that we're obviously familiar with. So Firmable, we're now starting to do renewals. We haven't had to do a lot of renewals because we're still relatively new, but we're now starting to do renewals, and we do renewals in a particular way. We are kind of a sales assisted, kind of moving up into kind of mid-market. That's kind of our motion, which is very different to an Oracle, which is, from an Aconex kind of heritage, which is very enterprise led. So I think being really able to clearly articulate that, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess regardless of your motion, inbound marketing is important for pretty much everyone. Heavier importance on the kind of, product-led growth organizations and self-serve and assisted. But across the board, obviously, the more demand that you can drive through inbound, where people have good intent, ready to talk to someone, the better. But inbound's really changed a lot, and it's changing like really, really rapidly. So, back in the day, we could rely on Google and SEO and SEM, and if I needed to get more leads,
give me more leads. Give me more leads next month. So.
Yeah. Paul would say, "Give me more leads," and I'd say, "Cool, give me some more Google budget." I'd throw it at it. I'd give him the leads. It was, if you were very analytical about it, you could really just kind of pull levers to drive up demand. And I think nowadays you just have to think about so much more than that. So more and more people are doing most of their buying process online before they're even engaging with someone, or even during that engagement process. More and more they're buying from people that they trust. So, what does that mean? So, for example, you need to make sure you're on review sites, and you're, people are going to comparison sites like G2 and other places like that to compare platforms and go, well, what are the alternatives to XYZ product, and what are people saying about them? And, it's one thing to hear from the company directly, but it always means so much more when you can get kind of very neutral third-party reviews from others. It means thinking about like, who are the influencers in your space? So who's out there, for us, it's who's out there talking about sales tech, and how can we connect with them and build relationships with them, and help bring them on as advocates, and really kind of amplify the reach. Kind of partly tied to that, it's like, who's running podcasts, or who's putting out good thought leadership or advice materials in your space that you can make sure you're kind of building awareness in. What partners should you be working with to maybe develop a partner program and do co-marketing with, and then all of this kind of combined really helps drive up inbound. And of course, there's AI and the role that plays now. And, that's really changed the world and landscape of Google. I know for me personally, when I've got a question I need to get the answer to, I used to be fully Google, and now I'm probably 9 times out of 10, I go straight to ChatGPT to get, I guess, a good consolidated aggregate view of the world. And sometimes, Google still plays a role, and I want to do specific image search or whatever it might be. But then you need to start thinking about, okay, it's not just about SEO anymore, it's about AI SO. So how do you optimize search for AI engines?
AI SO for the it's not ASO.
Well, it's AI search optimization. So it's thinking about, okay, well, I need to optimize my website not just for the search engines, but also for tools like ChatGPT, so that when they're serving up answers, they're actually looking at your site and giving up information that you've maybe produced. So how that's kind of changed, how you need to think about optimizing your site. It's like things like good FAQ lists and good how-to lists and first-party expert content, stuff like that AI kind of leans towards, and even Google nowadays as well. So it's not like it's a completely different approach. It's just both have evolved, and it's making sure that your kind of content and digital strategies are aligned with the new way that buyers search. So there's some implications to all of this. It's not as easy just to press a button, throw some more budget at something like Google to get more leads. It also makes it harder to attribute. So when Paul or others say okay, where did all the leads come through this month? It might be that, direct sign up, so people coming directly to our site or through branded keywords, is probably exaggerated by all the other work that we're doing in other channels that's leading to that kind of brand awareness to then come and search and find us. So that makes it a little bit harder to know kind of exactly what's working and where to place your effort. But I guess with that in mind, it's rare that there's any one silver bullet with inbound anyway. So I think, you've just got to kind of work out what you think will make most impact for your business, reach more of your prospects and buyers, and also ask people when you're talking to them, how did you hear about us? It's a bit kind of old school, but that can be super valuable to know what's working and what's not.
Tara,
Yep.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in there and ask a question of you and Paul. Given your experience across, say, the enterprise GTM motions and now here at Firmable with the kind of sales-led, what would you say the difference in pipeline percentage inbound would be across those channels? What should customers or could customers be expecting from an inbound percentage in their pipeline?
It really varies, business to business. I mean, just as a kind of reference point, was a Message Media, which was kind of high, volume, transactional, very digital-led inbound marketing program. I think we got to a point where that was 75 to 80% of closed deals had come through that source. But even in that model, outbound still plays such a strong role because that can often influence the higher value deals that come through, not just the count.
Yeah.
I think probably the big. So if you kind of step back from this, and I thought you made a great point before, Tara, which was what I think the core thing we've seen, and kind of this kind of explosion of AI automated messaging has made it easier to get to people, and it's just created more noise. So it's actually, as a buyer, you are deluged with all this noise, and it's in a sense quite confusing. So the more noise there is, I think the more you switch off or disengage from, email, et cetera, et cetera. So then I think the big implication for that is two things in my mind. Is one, as Tara said, people start to go to, well, who can I trust? Who can I talk to? So it becomes much more referential, I think, is kind of one of one of the theses we have in terms of, you know, what we're trying to do internally is to how can we be driving people recommending us to others. So that's, you know, and that picks up, I think Aaron asked a question on that. And that's one of the key things we're really trying to do is how can we drive people talking about us to partners, colleagues, you know, because that's always been the best way of, I guess, kind of driving inbound. So I guess that's kind of, that's probably like a core observation from us. And I think the second thing is, in a sense, I think marketing, there's this, you know, kind of trade-off between sales and marketing. And, you know, I think a lot of organizations swung very heavily towards sales and demand gen and how do we qualify and with the cost per lead and, you know, how do we drive an SDR motion? So, and it was very kind of demand orientated. I actually think some of the best businesses now are going to be those that are able to really effectively market and position their brand. So I think kind of brand identity and, you know, how people perceives you and how that cuts through is another implication for, I guess, kind of living in what's going to be a very crowded, you know, crowded landscape. So a couple of questions come through. I can hit you with them if you want, Tara.
Yeah, go for it.
So is LinkedIn a good source for networking? Are you active in that space? So
yeah, look, I think it definitely has its place. I think a lot of it's how you go about it. So, you know, there's obviously just general kind of posting and sharing of content and looking through feeds and that kind of stuff. And, you know, depending what you're talking about, it can actually have really good traction and then, you know, build really good reach once you get experts in the space reading, commenting, that kind of stuff. So we've had a lot of success, and a lot of our, you know, early customers came from, you know, leveraging our networks and LinkedIn heavily. Then I guess there's kind of the one-to-one outreach, and there's also automated tools that allow you to do that through personalization, and I'll touch on that in a second in the next tip. And look, that has very varied results for people. So I think it's, you know, thinking about, and I'll talk through this some more, but like having something relevant to talk to them about and reaching out at a good time. So yeah, I'll cover that a bit more shortly.
To kind of follow up on that LinkedIn question, and this is where I think you've almost got to think these things through in a bit first. So LinkedIn's good for us because salespeople spend their life on LinkedIn, right? So,
yes.
so like
yeah.
if you're selling to doctors are not on LinkedIn. So kind of LinkedIn is less relevant for you. So I think it's, you know, and if you're selling to construction, not really on LinkedIn that much, right? So it's really understanding who your buyer is and where they are. So that's, you know, I think.
Yeah, so much of this comes back to really that first tip around understanding your ICP.
Yeah, and we'll get to this in when we talk about SDRs, but you know, some people are more likely, so if you're making outbound phone calls, some people are more likely to answer their phones than others. Again, doctors, very unlikely to answer a phone call. Salespeople, quite likely to answer a phone call. So
because they don't want to miss out on a deal.
Yeah, like it's in a sense, it's quite simple, but it's those thinking through those kind of nuances of your market. And there was a question here about, you know, do you use the same strategies to rural areas? And probably not. I think some of the same thematics are right, but the way you reach and influence people, you know, kind of changes. So,
so just kind of, yeah, I guess segueing from that question, and also you talking about, you know, a lot of noise in the market as well, Paul. So, you know, there's questions about outbound and like, is it dead, particularly when you're talking about kind of outbound emailing? You know, I don't think it's dead. I think it has a different role now. Like I see it much more as just a branding and awareness play rather than a direct response play. So I think you still got to think about kind of where it fits in your outreach, you know, cycle and toolkit. But then, you know, a lot of the impact comes from how you approach relevancy and personalization. So if we just think back to like kind of how that's evolved over time, you know, back in the day, personalization meant, you know, a bit of that old school mail merge with your first name and your company name and that kind of stuff, but otherwise maybe fairly kind of generic with the, hey, what we can do for you. Then it kind of, advanced a bit. So starting to bring in things like, I see we have a shared connection on LinkedIn, or that we're both in Cremorne, want to catch up.
Hey, Tara, I see we went to the same university. Now, how about you buy whatever I'm selling? So
Yeah, exactly. And then there's been this like pivot towards just like hyper personalization. And, again, this has really developed a lot with the use of AI and being able to do hyper personalization at scale. So, I saw you just posted on LinkedIn about XYZ. Your company's looking to achieve whatever. Let me share some information with you.
now will you buy my stuff? So.
Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, like, let's face it, like, it's not that hard to tell. Even, I guess, this move towards trying to be really specific, or I see you also like golf, or whatever it might be, actually is almost like a key indicator that, okay, this is just AI or mass personalization. So when we're kind of craving this like personal touch and buying from a human, we've actually sometimes dehumanized it. It really depends on how you use it. But I think where we're kind of landing, at least, is that, yes, you want to personalize, but the key thing is giving like a unique insight on a pain point for that customer. So, depends what you're selling, of course, but like, I see you're listed on XYZ site. Your two competitors, I can see, are ranking high at. I can tell you how to beat them, or whatever it might be. So what are they struggling with day to day? And just quickly getting to the point, in a couple of sentences, here's how I can help you, and call to action to have a chat.
Yeah, like really relevant context and company pain point orientated. So I think they're so that's that move away from. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were, and what you've seen, and with the explosion of sales loft and outreach, the email response rates have just absolutely fallen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then there was kind of there's two kind of responses to that, and they were like, there's two types of people, right? There's coders and connectors, right? So a connector goes, I need to have 10 deals. I'm going to find 100 really relevant people, and I'm going to try and have 50 super relevant, personal, kind of connected conversations, and get 10 deals out of that. So that's the connector. That's one way of doing it. The coder goes, oh, gee, my email response rate has dropped from 1% to 0.1%. Oh, that's okay. I've just got to figure out how to send 10 times more emails. Like, there's kind of there's two ways of thinking about it, and definitely I think the key to all of this is context and pain points.
Yeah. And combining it with that multi-channel approach. So we'll do this outreach, but we'll make sure we've got SDRs following up on a phone call that gets cut through. And then you've already got the prospects that's got that awareness, has heard us mentioned before, and might be more receptive to a conversation on the back of that. So I guess we talked about relevance. Timeliness is really key. Like, everybody knows, if you go into a sales conversation that kind of lines up with, a fundamental event for that company, it can make the deal easier to close. So it could be that they've just hired a new C-level exec that wants to bring in new tech, new processes, make changes, that kind of stuff. Really depends on the business. So yes, you want to keep the conversation relevant, personalized, but you really then need to know when's the right time to reach out with that message to help with your conversion rate. So there's a lot of data that exists now to help highlight those events or signals or triggers or whatever you want to call it, that helps allow you to know, that this is a good time to have a sales conversation. It doesn't necessarily mean that buyer is in like an active kind of search intent process, but there might just be things that indicate that they're more likely on the lookout for a solution like yours, or have more interest in having a conversation. So like I mentioned before, it could be that there's a new C-level appointment. It could be that there's just been a funding round for that business, and then they've got more budget to kind of bring in new tools or processes. It could be a new job ad was posted. I mentioned earlier, we kind of look out for that. So new sales role posted for a tech company. That's a great time to kind of say, hey, let us help get your new rep off to a good start. So I guess it varies for each company, but really think about what are those compelling events that make it a good time to reach out and help fast track the deal cycle with your prospects. And bit of a shameless plug, but we're actually rolling out this signals capability to our own customers over the next week on Teams Pro Plan. So I know we've got a few customers on the call today, so hopefully that's some good news for you.
Yeah, it's even kind of stepping aside from what we're doing, there's no doubt, I think, the two things that this access to external data and also AI have done is made the ability to collect and synthesize and serve up events / signals, triggers, or whatever you want to call them. It's one of the big trends, I think, in sales and marketing. So thinking through, so if there's one tip, it's like, okay, what are your triggers, signals, events that either help define your ICP or give you clues that they are, they're more likely to be in a buying cycle. So I think it's it's a super important thing, I think. Cool. Back to me, I think. So one of the things that we're really passionate about is how to run, I guess, a great kind of outbound kind of SDR team. With all the best will in the world, very few organizations ever have quite enough inbound leads. So you're almost always looking at, well, how can we both do, build as much inbound, but really how can we do outbound? And building an effective kind of SDR / kind of outbound team is, I think, one of the key things to driving sustainable growth. One of the great things about an SDR team too is assuming your market is big enough, if the economics work, it is a way that you can layer in resources and get predictable kind of pipeline generation in a way that in some ways inbound can be hard to influence, particularly in the short term. SDRs is something that can be really predictable. So first thing, of course, is build a simple model. And this doesn't have to be hard, but okay, it's and I think there's actually some I think we actually published one on LinkedIn a while back. But it's okay for my team. How many connects? So how many calls? The way we think about it is how many calls should they be making? How many connects? So connect is a conversation. How many times they get into a conversation? Then how often does that conversation convert to a meeting? And then once we have the meeting, okay, how are those opportunities or meetings converting to opportunities and ultimately into deals? And the first thing to do is just lay that out. Set up a model. The first time you do it, when you start doing it, you'll of course your assumptions will all be wrong, but it then gives you a really good framework as to how to measure it. And importantly, you can go, okay, well, what do I need to believe for my what I need to believe that my team can produce for the economics to stack up? So that's the first bit. The second bit of then is to kind of really define those stages, set the critical activities, set up your reporting frameworks, and just kind of start measuring it. And then the third step, and this is probably our big learning, to be honest, is how do you, particularly in a world where you're quite horizontal and you've got a large number of companies, one of the things that can be quite tricky is making sure that for SDRs, you are targeting companies rather than a whole series of prospects. Because if you think about what you're trying to do, you're trying to target a specific company. So, our workflow is, okay, you get allocated a company. We then look at, what are the 5 or 6 kind of key people that might be relevant in that company. And we look to call into 5 or 6 people, probably 4 to 5 times within a particular company. So we're really trying to target the company and work around that. So, and be really data driven as to how you do that. What we do is every Monday we have a meeting with our SDR team, and we go through the week, and we have a set of stages that we define, and we basically feed companies into our SDR hopper, if you like, our pipeline. And they kind of work their way through. And the outcome is either we get a meeting with that company, or that company kind of goes to timeout, if you like. So we just basically put it in a holding pen for 3 months, and then we just kind of leave it alone for 3 months. And we do that on a particular kind of sub-segment basis, which makes it really easy for us to then go, okay, well, what did we learn this week? What was resonating, what was not resonating? How is this sub-segment? Should we do more of this? Should we do less of this? And this which really leads into the final step, which is this kind of experiment, iterate, and refine. So what data are you capturing, making sure you're getting feedback loops, both kind of analytical feedbacks, connects, conversions, etc., but also just subjective and anecdotal. What are you hearing? What's resonating? What's not resonating? Probably the other thing I really encourage is, we have just learned so much from our SDR team about what our customers want and what's resonating. It's just so valuable sitting next to the SDR team in the middle of it and just overhearing the conversations and going, oh, hey Blair, that was a really interesting one. Why did they say that? So it's just being really curious about what's coming at you. Your SDR team really is the tip of the spear, I just think you can learn so much by being really connected into what your SDR team's doing.
Well, we have a question from Jackson on the chat, talking about buyer intent data, which is something that we also are talking a lot about. Is asking whether it is actually worth using when deciding who you'll contact, and is there something Firmable is looking to bring out in the future?
Yes. There's a couple of different. So just to come back a little bit, it's a really good question. Buyer intent is something that we think about a bit. So traditionally, buyer intent is, what are people searching for online? So the typical way that works is there's a whole series of companies out there who look at trying to map search kind of patterns to IP addresses, which then relate to companies. So in our world, that would be, okay, tell me, we've noticed that IBM is doing a search for sales intelligence. You should maybe call IBM, okay? So that's an example of intent data. Intent data can be good. It has a couple of limitations, though. It really depends on so if you're selling to SMBs, the mapping to IP addresses is not particularly strong. So if you've got a very SMB orientated motion, it's not that great. Also, in our world, if we hear that IBM or Google is looking for sales intelligence, that doesn't really help us a lot figure out who to call. So that's not so helpful. But then there are other elements of intent that can be good. You can get some good insights into who's hitting your website sometimes, so that can be powerful. You can also get intent in other ways. So one of the things we do, for instance, is we get intent through G2, so review sites. So that's another example of intent. People who are looking at review sites on review sites. So there's different ways to think about it. I think it can be interesting. And it is something that we are looking at. We've had a few customers, so it's kind of on our, kind of probably mid-year roadmap to bring out an intent product. Basically, there's 2 or 3 kind of global providers, which you can kind of feed their data into your platform. So yes, it is something we're looking at. How useful it is really varies on who you're targeting, and I'm very happy to have a longer, more specific chat about our learnings and experience in that space. Sorry, Tara, this is probably more your area than mine. I don't know whether.
No, you nailed it, Paul. Glad to hear you've been listening. I think we're going to segue into the world of AI, and
Well, here we go. Yep.
And Paul, we could probably almost like have a full webinar just on this. So we might need to like rein you in if you go on too much, and then we might do a follow up on this at some point if people are interested.
Yeah, like I think so probably our core hypothesis or kind of point of view on this is there's no doubt AI is going to dramatically change the world of sales and marketing. It's not going to eliminate salespeople, though. What it's going to do, I believe, and I think we believe, is make sales and marketing organizations and individuals 2 to 3 times more effective. So there's this great opportunity, if you like, to make to kind of reshape how a function works, and particularly in sales, it's not one activity. So which is why exactly how AI plays out into the sales function is going to be quite nuanced, I think. So sales is you are researching and you are preparing for a call, and then you're prospecting, and then you're assembling data, and then you're having a customer conversation, and then you're writing notes, and then you're doing follow-up emails, and then you're figuring out who the other people in the account are, and then you're doing then you're writing a proposal, and then you're responding to a tender, and then you're doing a security review, and then so you can see that the tasks that a salesperson does really vary, and they also really vary by the type of sales motion you're doing. So if you've got a high transaction, so if you're selling 200K deals, you're spending a lot of time trying to have great conversations, make those meetings really effective. In that world, there's a set of tools that are really going to be helpful for you. So tools that make more efficient to respond to emails, to summarize meetings, to write proposals, to respond to security questionnaires, to do coaching, to do kind of enablement, to capture insights. There's a whole set of tools that make sense if you've got that type of motion. Whereas if you've got a 100% inbound motion, there's a great set of AI tools that enable you to lead score. How do I lead score? How do I lead route? And in the middle, which is kind of where we are in a sense, is there's some great tools that allow you to think through how I structure my account research. So in our world, if we've got an SDR, what are the 5 or 6 key things we want to know about every company that we can serve up straight away that make that conversation as crisp and as clear and as easy to prepare for as possible. So that's an AI tool that makes it more efficient to prepare for a call. So I think the first principles advice is to take a bit of a look at your sales motion and go, okay, where are we spending time and which bits can be made more efficient? And I think that's the mindset. How can they be made more efficient? So I think there's probably a few areas of kind of low-hanging fruit. I think if you're not using call recordings, that's an absolute kind of no-brainer. So call recordings unlock so many things. They unlock, so in our world, they unlock how do you map competitors or installed solutions through to your CRM. So knowing, for all the opportunities you've spoken to, how many of them have X CRM or how many have, and that information is critical for us. And historically, you've kind of relied on reps or salespeople putting that in. Now you can do that in an automated way, and that's just such a powerful thing. Even not having to take meeting notes, and you can get your note taker to go, well, okay, here's the meeting summary. Here's the template of a meeting summary that is most important for us. Here are the key things we want to know. Who's the installed solution, who the competitor is, how many seats they might have, et cetera, et cetera. So you're able to kind of set up structured kind of meeting summaries. So if you're not doing that, that's a no-brainer. Then the area that we're spending a lot of time within Firmable is how you can, I guess, kind of streamline kind of prospecting and kind of updates. So making the process of kind of going outbound as efficient as possible. So how can you easily identify the next best set of prospects to contact? How can I make it really simple to use a sales agent to update my CRM? How can I have a kind of an account research template that's specific to my organization and matches the key things that I want my reps, my SDRs to be talking about? And then if you're a larger organization, I think there's some, I've seen some examples of some great tools around sales coaching. So the days of, there's a great tool that I was kind of looking at the other day. And, again, if you're more enterprise orientated, if you've got a bigger sales organization, which basically is an AI agent that acts as a demo partner. So basically you feed in all of your demos. It's able to, for a new starter, it's able to do a live kind of demo where it feeds back to them objections and questions, and it's a better experience than even a manager could do. So there's 101,001 ways which I think AI can influence productivity and efficiency. So it's really about, again, go back to first principles, go, okay, what's the low-hanging fruit for us? Is it helping us do security questionnaires? Is it helping us prospect better? Is it helping us, whatever it is in your world? So again, I could, as Tara said, I could talk for hours on this, so I should probably stop.
So I guess transitioning from AI tools to just the broader landscape of marketing and sales tools. And I'll try to be quick here, just conscious of time, but it is just absolutely exploded. I still remember when this MarTech landscape came out in 2011. I think we hadn't long implemented Salesforce and Marketo back in Aconex days, Paul. And there weren't that many. Like, it was easy to actually see the logos on the page, but that's just impossible now. So Where do you start? So we thought the best way to talk through this was actually kind of sharing what our tech stack looks at right now. So, you know, we're in startup mode. You know, we're all about how we can better drive, you know, process and efficiency and scale and best support our customers. So yeah, this is a bit of what it looks like right now. So a lot of what we've talked about, particularly early on, about defining your ICP and the importance of data. Of course, we use our own platform. Just, you know, that's really a foundation to almost everything that we do, kind of in the sales and marketing space. We use a ton of AI tools as well. So that's both for us as a business to help us provide the best product possible out for customers, but also us internally. You know, it's totally reshaped the speed and scale that we can, you know, produce, you know, content and, you know, define plans and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if you're not using AI right now, or if there's, you know, people on your sales and marketing teams resistant to it, like that has to change.
Do yourself a favor.
Yeah, exactly. There's, of course, you know, your typical suite of, you know, analytics tools. So Google Analytics and ads and your social channels that, you know, we're working both organically and in a paid way as well. Also thinking about your engagement and outreach tools. Paul just mentioned Fathom for capturing, you know, conversations when we're engaging with customers. That's been an absolute game changer for me personally over the past month since we've kind of rolled that out, and just the speed at which it kind of, you know, allows you to capture good notes and automate the admin tasks that nobody likes to do back into the CRM and that kind of stuff is great. Smart Lead as well, we use for our email campaign sending. So even though we've got HubSpot as our CRM and marketing hub, you know, that's really for your you know, opted in prospect world and customer world. So Smart Lead allows you to kind of do outbound, but in a one-to-one way that allows you to get deliverability into your inbox. So we love that. There's, of course, internal collaboration tools, Slack, Notion, the usual there. And yeah, we're relying on HubSpot for our CRM and marketing and service hub too. And then lastly, Paul, do you want to just talk about the importance of staying up to date on things?
Yeah, look, you know, and there's a bit of a thematic around this, but the world's changing super rapidly. You know, the best thing the best bit of advice, you know, I think we could give you, or, you know, people have given us, or is just to be really curious. You know, be really curious about what your customers are saying, what the data is telling you. You know, have a mindset where, okay, that's interesting. What's the hypothesis? What does that mean? Find people in your org that, you know, you can talk to and they tell you stuff. Talk to, you know, drop by and chat to your customer success team, chat to your SDRs. Like, just be really try and be really open and assimilating information, because that it really helps you drive your go to market. And then how do you connect, and, you know, what's your learning strategy outside your org? So, you know, in our world, there's a heap of kind of, particularly in the US, there's a heap of kind of, you know, I like listening to podcasts when I'm out running or in the car or whatever, and that's just that I find that super helpful of giving me some context for what's happening in the world of sales and marketing tech. So, and that'll be different for everybody, but just, you know, just be curious, read, listen, learn. There's so much happening out there, and then try and synthesize that to implications for your org.
Nice one. So that kind of, I guess, takes us to the end of the tips. I won't kind of go back over them, just given time. And I think there's a few more questions, maybe just before we get to that, just very quickly. Anyone that's, you know, interested in learning more about Firmable, feel free to sign on for a trial or have a conversation with us. And any of our customers as well, if you want a consult around our new signals functionality, happy to do that as well.
Anyone that just wants to chat sales and marketing, because
Tara and Paul, thank you so much for taking us through the deck and presentation. I'm trying to collate. I finally found the Q&A box. Thanks, Paul, for starting that question off. There is a couple of questions that were around kind of ROI and how to present value, especially inbound value back to executive team. I don't know whether you want to kind of cover those off now, Tara, or whether you want to answer some of the kind of questions that are still sitting up around
Yeah. Why don't we,
AI and human outreach. That was quite a good
why
one
don't we
from
pick up a
Natalie.
couple of the questions that people have written? So.
Yeah, I mean, attribution and ROI is quite a complex topic, and it's not as clear cut of an answer as it, was previously. Like, I feel like we kind of nailed attribution reporting a few years ago, and now it's just a lot more complex. It's also just given the stage that we're at, we're not kind of attributing things to the nth level. But I think a combo of, really trying to attribute where you can, asking the question where you can, depending on your motion, and also just understanding that there will be measures like, direct source traffic that will be really attributed to kind of halo effect of other activities. So you will never get, it's not an exact science. I don't know how to make it one these days.
I think probably the other comment there is, start with your top metrics. Okay,
Mhm.
so what's the value of our ARR divided by our cost of sales and marketing? So start with your kind of your org level metrics, and then
Yep.
try and best you can. And probably the other bit of advice is directional is often all you need, right? So you kind of you don't need perfect attribution to know whether something's working or not working. So I think don't get obsessed about perfection. Directional is fine, and then there's this concept called creative destruction. What are the things that we did last quarter that didn't work that we should stop? So you just kind of be in that mindset around, I think when you think around attribution.
Great. So we're nearly at the top of the hour. Did we want to answer that question there from Natalie around balancing AI and data with human outreach while personalizing the service, pushy or robotic? This was actually a topic we discussed last week.
Yeah, I guess for us on the outreach component, like, we're not using AI dialers and stuff like that. Like, we're using AI to, and our own data to like help we speed up account research and get the message right and take notes when you're on the call to save that admin time, stuff like that. But nothing's going to beat just that human element of the actual conversation and message. So that's how I guess we kind of balance the use of AI in outreach. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Tara. Now, as we mentioned at the start, we've got some customers online as well as some people across the market. So there's varying questions. To say that we've had a huge amount of interest in how to get the most out of Firmable and some of the Signal data coming soon. We definitely will be doing customer webinars post this, looking at really how to use Firmable and get the most effective use of it, as well as signals and AI agents as well. So we'll follow up with customers post this webinar on a bit more of a webinar series on how to deep dive into that. There's definitely some themes here around reporting, AI, inbound, that I think we should definitely look at holding a little bit more of a focused area webinar on that as an outcome. Any other takeaways from you, Paul and Tara, before I close off the webinar?
Just always open to feedback. So so if people are seeing interesting stuff out there on the market, just drop us a line. So include us in the conversation. Love to, as I said, we love chatting about sales and marketing and how we can make B2B outreach more effective.
Yeah, and any of the questions that we didn't get to as well, happy to help with direct follow-ups.
Yeah, perfect, excellent. Well,
Thanks
everyone
for joining us. Stay safe. The weather here in Melbourne's pretty bad, and obviously we're thinking of everyone up north at the moment. But otherwise, I hope you have an enjoyable Thursday, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey guys.